You literally need to enjoy hurting yourself if you want to play Danjin more effectively, because she sucks the life out of her own body with her resonance skill, which makes her the perfect definition of a skill issue character. I may or may not enjoy pain, but she has one of the most satisfying gameplay after spending an unhealthy amount of time testing her for an advanced character breakdown. If you're new here on the channel, welcome to another video that belongs to the character breakdown series, where I spend a god-awful amount of time testing characters in every possible way that I can think of to bring you a detailed review and updated tips and tricks breakdown of their kit to help you unlock their full potential. This will not be a generic guide because I'm going to skip the kit overview and go straight to how her kit design affects her playstyle in every possible way that you can play Danjin, whether solo, sub DPS, or even main DPS. Since Danjin is the best havoc damage buffer that we currently have in the game, I believe this video will help anyone who plans to pull for Camellia, so if that's you, I've got you covered. Here's what I'm going to be covering in this video: how her kit alters her playstyle, fast forte regeneration in different situations, abusing iframes or invulnerability frames, best build depending on sequences that you have, and lastly, optimized rotations. If you take a look at the skill description, it says that she can buff her personal damage by 20% to the enemies that are marked with something called Incinerating Will. To make it easy to understand, Danjin has two combos, which I'm sure you're probably aware of, and they are determined by how many basic attacks you perform before pressing her skill. If you do 2 basic attacks and spam her skill, she'll perform a cross-slash attack called Crimson Erosion. She can also use Crimson Erosion right after her intro skill by basically spamming your skill button. Please keep that in mind because I'll be using that term in the entire video. To apply the Incinerating Will damage buff, you will need to deal damage with the Crimson Erosion, which applies a small mark on the enemy, as you can see right here, and this buff lasts for 12 seconds. When you press 3 basic attacks and spam her skill, she'll perform a combo known as Sanguine Pulse. Please keep this in mind as well because I'll be using this term in the entire video. Her second inherent passive grants her a 30% heavy attack buff if she uses Sanguine Pulse. Keep in mind that casting her skill without any combo will help Danjin recover forte stacks and concerto energy as well. You can easily use Crimson Erosion to get the 20% damage buff after dodge counters by pressing her skill twice. Now, everything I've said so far is how Kuro wants you to play Danjin. So let's get to the more advanced stuff that I discovered with forte stacks generation. It turns out that you can actually use her skill first, which generates a decent amount of forte stacks and concerto energy, and the game will recognize this as a basic attack. So you can use her skill first, do 1 basic attack, which will start from the second stage, and then spam her resonance skill, which will allow you to use Crimson Erosion. You can use this trick to do the Sanguine Pulse combo as well by using her skill first, do 2 basic attacks, and then spam her skill, which fills up a decent amount of her forte stacks. However, the goal is to generate half of her forte bar in 1 combo, so here's how to pull that off. You need to use her skill twice, then do 2 basic attacks, and then spam her skill to activate the Sanguine Pulse combo. This is a guaranteed method of obtaining half of her forte bar by using just 1 Sanguine Pulse. Here's a much detailed representation of the tech. You first need to cast her skill, but dash as soon as you see Danjin facing the opposite direction. Keep in mind that if you dash too early, you won't be able to get the full forte stacks that only the skill press gives you. However, you can just wait for the animation to finish before you press the skill again. Now, when she faces the opposite direction or when the skill animation is completed, you now have to dash, press the skill again, and do 2 basic attacks. After that, spam your skill button to cast the Sanguine Pulse, and there you have it, a half full forte bar in just 1 Sanguine Pulse combo. You can then do the same thing again to fill the other half. The reason why we include dashes is because there's a huge delay after casting her skill and doing a complete Crimson Erosion combo or Sanguine Pulse combo. This tech also comes in handy when boss's vibrational strength is completely broken, where you can't regenerate any forte stacks after dodge counters with her skill. It also ensures that you can always easily refresh the 30% heavy attack buff from her inherent skill, which has a 5 seconds cooldown. The best part about Sanguine Pulse is that you don't need to land the last hit to activate the 30% heavy attack buff. You just need to start the combo with your skill to activate it, and then that's it. When your forte stacks get full or half full, simply hold your basic attacks to cut every enemy in your area of effect 7 times, called Chaos Cleave, and then end it with a final slash called Scatter Bloom. The beauty of her Crimson Erosion and Sanguine Pulse combo is that you can delay them for about a second and then continue the rest of the combo, which you can easily use to parry incoming attacks like this one. Now let's move on to how we can abuse her invulnerability frames. If you're not familiar with invulnerability frames, it's basically an animation that grants you full immunity to damage. A good example is the dodge animation that you can trigger by dashing when there's an incoming damage. Danjin is by far the only character that has a lot of invulnerability frames or iframes in her gameplay per my testing. If you hold her basic attack, when you have less than half of her forte, she'll do a normal heavy attack to transform into a fast flurry of slashes. The normal heavy attack animation and the Chaos Cleave version all have invulnerability frames, so there's not much risk associated with her forte when using it to do damage as long as you're close to the enemy. Her dodge counter spin animation also has a lot of iframes. The spin itself has a very long animation compared to other dodge counters, so as long as your spinning animation is in play, nothing can touch you. You can also take it a bit further by delaying the dodge counter, which is called delayed counters. It basically allows you to prolong the dodge invulnerability animation, which you can then carry over to the spin animation. It's also worth mentioning that Danjin is one of the few characters that can regenerate a lot of Concerto energy by just using her Chaos Cleave and Scatter Bloom, which gives you 50 Concerto energy. It's so good that you can even decide not to use her Liberation during your rotations and she will still feel her Concerto energy very quickly. This also comes in handy for teammates like Shorekeeper, who has a very poor Concerto regeneration in the first rotation. I'll discuss this in detail at the Optimized Rotations section. Now let's talk about her best possible build depending on what sequence nodes that you have. For her weapon options, always try to go for 5-star weapons if possible because Danjin is a 4-star and 4 stars tend to have a low base attack. The Blazing Brilliance will be her best in slot at the moment because the passive not only gives you attack but buffs your resident skill damage as well. If you don't have this, the next alternative is the Emerald of Genesis, which you can easily obtain from the standard banner. The 4-star alternatives are the Endless Collapse, which I recommend because of the high base attack, and then the Commander of Conviction comes at a close second. Try to stay away from Lunar Cutter as much as possible because it has a terrible passive and is very conditional. Your free-to-play option is the Sword 18, which you can craft for free at Waste Shop. For a DPS build, your best echo option is the Sun Sinking Eclipse, which gives you 40% havoc damage bonus, but the issue with this echo set for Danjin is that Danjin uses her skill attack more than her basic attacks, as I mentioned in the methods of regenerating forte stacks, so activating the full buff may become a challenge. However, I'll show you how you can easily get around this issue in the Optimized Rotations section. If you have her S1 and you're running a 5-star weapon, use double havoc damage bonus, but if you don't have her S1, go for attack and havoc damage bonus. The 4-cost echo can be Dreamless or Crownless depending on how you want to play Danjin. Crownless is often said to take more field time before you can get the Havoc bonus and the Resonance skill bonus buff, but this is actually not true. You just need to transform and exit the transformation by dashing and you will still get the full buff. On the other hand, you can easily swap out of Dreamless after dealing damage once the Echo skill animation begins. So, the choice is up to you. If you're playing solo Danjin, the Roshroom will be the best because it's a summoning type Echo and it has a very short cooldown, so it's good for extra damage. For a sub DPS build, your 4-cost Echo will obviously be Impermanence Heron, and the 3-cost will be attack and havoc damage bonus. The 1-cost will be attack main stat. If you can't afford a 4-3-3-1-1 set because you're lacking crit, you can go for 4-4-1-1-1 until you get a good 4-3-3-1-1 set. Now, let's move on to her optimized rotations for different roles in your team building. For a sub DPS Danjin, your priority is to do damage without spending too much time on the field. So you'll need to fill her forte bar to at least half before you use her heavy attack to get the outro skill very quickly. I'll be demonstrating how you can achieve this with a Havoc Rover team. You first need to use Shorekeeper's skill and then swap to Danjin and use her skill twice. The next Crimson Erosion combo from your dodge counter will fill half of her forte bar, so using her heavy attack will fully fill her Concerto energy. Then swap to Shorekeeper without using her Heron skill. This allows Shorekeeper to easily get Concerto energy to reduce the time that she spent on the field doing basic attacks in the first rotations to recover forte stacks. Complete Shorekeeper's basic attack sequence to regenerate full forte stacks. You can then use her heavy attack to consume the stacks before using her liberation, but I had to dodge here, which gave me enough Concerto energy to use my liberation. use her Echo skill, and then swap to Danjin and use her Crimson Erosion after the intro skill. For a Havoc Rover team, what I like to do to keep Danjin's buff for the longest possible time is to swap to Rover when Danjin's Concerto energy is not full, and then cancel the swap attack into a heavy attack followed by a full basic attack sequence. The reason for doing this is to activate the 30% Havoc damage bonus from the 5-piece Havoc set before we intro to Rover from Danjin after filling at least half of her Forte bar and using her Chaos Cleave and Scatter Bloom. The best part about this rotation is that you have a full Forte bar on Havoc Rover as well, so all you need to do is hold your basic attack after the intro and Rover will instantly enter the Dark Surge state. You can then use Rover's Liberation, skill, heavy attack, and then spam her basic attacks. Use the Dreamless Echo when Havoc Rover's Concerto energy is full, and then intro with Shorekeeper to repeat the rotation once again. In the subsequent rotations, you don't need Danjin to supply Concerto energy because Shorekeeper's special intro gives her 20 Concerto energy. For a hypercarry Danjin, I'll be using Shorekeeper and Mortefi. You first need to activate Shorekeeper's skill and then swap to Danjin to fill half of her Forte bar and use her heavy attack to fill her Concerto energy just like we did for the previous rotation. Use the Dreamless Echo skill and then swap back to Shorekeeper. Use her Liberation and then do some basic attacks to fill her Forte stacks. Use a heavy attack to consume the stacks which will fill her Concerto energy. Use her Echo skill and then swap to Danjin to cast her Crimson Erosion combo after the intro. Swap to Mortefi to fill her Concerto energy by using his basic attacks and skill. Since we used Shorekeeper's skill very early in the rotation, you can swap to her and use her skill, which will make the next rotation even shorter because you'll get a lot of Concerto energy. Swap back to Mortefi, use a skill, and then Liberation to fully fill his Concerto energy. Use the Heron skill and then swap to Danjin for a Crimson Erosion combo after the intro. Use her Liberation and focus on regenerating her Forte stacks as much as possible by using the Sanguine Pulse, which gives her 30% heavy attack bonus. And keep in mind that only focusing on Sanguine Pulse will ensure that Danjin can activate the full 30% Havoc damage bonus from the Havoc set, use her Chaos Cleave and Scatter Bloom, and then end the rotation by using the Dreamless skill and intro with Shorekeeper. Shorekeeper should have a lot of Concerto energy in the second rotation, so you don't need Danjin to feed her with Concerto energy like we did before. If you take the time to practice everything I've showed you in this video, your Danjin becomes a 6-star character that you can use to clear any content, especially if you enjoy playing high-risk, high-reward characters. Danjin will always remain top tier regardless of meta changes in the game because she's a character that becomes better based on the skill level and game knowledge that the player possesses. If you got this far, thank you so much for watching and consider liking and subscribing because these character breakdowns take me so much time to make. Catch you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.
So please whatever.